Can I have just a volunteer to begin reading the book of Acts? Okay, got it? Tell me your name again.
Josh.
Josh. I should remember that because my son's name is Josh. Okay, Josh, would you please begin reading the book of Acts, and I will stop you when you get to the point where I need to make a comment of something.
In my former book.
Stop. You missed the title. So let's try it again, Josh, and start from the title.
Okay, Jesus taking up to heaven.
No, before that, the title of the book.
Acts 1:1.
Okay, let's begin reading there. Go ahead.
Jesus taking up to heaven.
No, the title.
Acts 1:1.
Stop. I want to talk about this title of the book of Acts for just a minute. What does that even mean, Acts? Actually, did you know that in ancient world there were a number of books that had the title Acts? But not just the title, the one word, Acts. It was always Acts of, and then they would fill in the blank with the name of their favorite superhero. Well, not really a superhero. They were real people. Acts of Paul and Thecla, Acts of Dionysius, Acts of some famous person that they wanted to write a book about this famous person. So, we just have Acts 1:1. We don't have the rest of the information. Who is the famous person that the book of Acts is about? Any guesses? Jesus is one guess, and the answer is no, it is not about Jesus, because in fact it will say in the first verse, it was about all that Jesus began to do and to teach. But this is a two-part work, you know. The first part was about Jesus. The second part is, in fact, I heard someone say it, the Holy Spirit. Oh, I heard someone say the apostles. In fact, in some Bibles it will be written Acts of the Apostles. But let me vie for Acts of the Holy Spirit as opposed to Acts of the Apostles. If it is about the Acts of the Apostles, then which apostles is it about? If it is about the apostles, the deeds of the famous heroes, which apostles is it about? Paul. Do you know what chapter we meet Paul? Chapter 9. And he doesn't become a major player until chapter 13. So from chapter 13 to chapter 28, that's the end of the book, Paul is like everywhere. But prior to that, there is another apostle that gets the lion's share of interest in the book of Acts. Who is it? Peter. And I'm going to talk more tomorrow about the comparison between Peter and Paul in the book of Acts. But this is not a book about the Acts of the Apostles, plural. If it is apostles, it is the Acts of Peter and the Acts of Paul. And it might in fact be that, but we get very few of their acts, actually. So if we were going to entitle this Acts of the Apostles, we should literally title it, this is a book about some of the acts of some of the apostles. Or more specifically, some of the acts of two of the apostles. But for example, Paul in 1 Corinthians gives a whole list of all the sufferings he'd gone through. Beaten so many times, shipwrecked so many times, stoned so many times. You know, he said he'd been shipwrecked 3 times. The book of 1 Corinthians was written about Acts 19. Okay? You know how many times Paul had been shipwrecked by Acts 19 in the book of Acts? 0. So what you're telling me is he had been shipwrecked 3 times, and Luke doesn't even tell us about it. Yeah, Acts 27, he's shipwrecked again a 4th time. But 1 Corinthians had already been written by then. So what I'm saying to you is, you look at just the sufferings of Paul. Just the sufferings of Paul. Forget about church planting. Forget about sermons he's preached. Forget about people he's won to the Lord. Just his sufferings. You have a very incomplete record in the book of Acts of the acts of Paul. And with Peter, it's even more incomplete. So I don't like the title Acts of the Apostles as a title for this book, mostly because it is a 2-volume work, and volume A, Luke, is about Jesus, and volume B is about Jesus' replacement, and that is not, frankly, Peter. It is the Holy Spirit. Now you think about the implications of the title of this book. This is the acts of our hero, the Holy Spirit. In a couple weeks, we're going to have a series of lectures that are just on the Holy Spirit. And I want to tell you now, we're going to talk a lot about the Holy Spirit, and I want you to know Him as your hero, because He is the one driving all of the works in the book of Acts. Is this making sense? But I want to tell you something else about Acts of the Apostles, or the book of Acts. And not Acts of the Apostles, Acts of the Holy Spirit. The Acts of the Holy Spirit are almost invariably through people. There are over 100 people mentioned in this book. Some of them very famous, like Peter and Paul. Some of them infamous, and some of them just, you don't even get their names. They're just mentioned. And in this book, you see the record of the Holy Spirit using famous, infamous, and insignificant people for His glory. And if I could just get devotional on you here for a minute, I want to tell you, Josh, the Holy Spirit is going to use you. And you, unlike any other book of the Bible, you get to add lines to this book. Because it's not finished yet. Miss Udell, the Holy Spirit will use women in this book. And we'll look a lot at the women that God uses through His Holy Spirit to do unprecedented things in the book of Acts. And you need to get it in your mind and in your heart right now that as we go through this book, I'm going to let the Holy Spirit teach me and guide me and train me to do something in this world that makes a difference. Tiff, the Holy Spirit is going to come alongside you and use you through this school year. This year may be the most transformational of your entire life. 16 is a big one. You get to drive and just start dating and all that stuff. But the first year of college, I love the zeal of freshmen. But that's going to be tempered some, thankfully. But what the Holy Spirit can do with you, if you will just open up your heart to Him and say, okay, I am going to be one of the people the Holy Spirit uses. Do you guys get that? This class is not about learning ancient history. It's about trying to be part of a movement of God that started 2,000 years ago, because the same Holy Spirit is still writing history. And some of you will come out of this class famous. I mean, you will be people who, people go, oh man, they're smart, or they're great preachers, or they're great musicians.